He followed her outside the cab and killed her in the middle of the street. And it was senseless.
My mom called and she was crying and yelling on the phone and telling me that Lucy had died.
This was a true whodunit.
The race was on to try to find a match or try to compare DNA samples.
How your knife could have got into the body of the victim.
It's a pretty graphic question there.
We go back and we review all of the files again to see if we've missed something in that investigation.
There's no way I could sit with that and not do anything about it.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, we take you back to 1990. A horrific robbery gone bad created a murder mystery. Now, it was a real whodunit with no clear suspects for police to focus on. The case went cold until investigators were able to use new technology to zero in on the killer. Here now is Nancy Hixt with Murder in the Mountains.
The breathtaking beauty of Banff, in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by glacier-fed lakes and streams, attracts millions of visitors from all over the world every year. Tourism is Banff's economic lifeline, and seasonal workers thrive on the jobs it creates. In the spring of 1990, Lucy Turmel, a young woman from Quebec, was working as a taxi driver. Midway through her shift, early in the morning on May 17, 1990, she pulled up to the condo she shared with her boyfriend.
She stopped and discussed her day's activities, and at that time she had mentioned to him that it was a very slow night, and I think she had made about $130. So that's basically what she was traveling with. And I guess give him a kiss goodnight, and she had to work till about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then she would see them the next morning.
Their conversation was interrupted by her dispatcher. She had fares waiting for pickup at the Banff Springs Hotel.
It was a male and 2 females who got into her cab.
Lucy Turmel left the Banff Springs Hotel at about 1:40 a.m. Minutes later, her radio went silent.
At about 2 o'clock in the morning, Larry from Taxi, he's the other driver at the time in Banff, Alberta, was trying to get a hold of Lucy Turmel. There was 2 cabs on that night. It was a fairly quiet night, and he was radioing her and couldn't get any response.
Lucy's coworker drove to the residential address she'd radioed in as her destination, but she wasn't there. He then drove past her condo, and still no sign of Lucy.
Shortly after that, he was coming down, going, I believe it's north on Banff Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare in Banff, where all the stores generally are. And he noticed the white taxi, a Ford Crown Victoria, going south. And it was heading towards the forestry office across the bridge. And it was a male driving it. It wasn't Lucy. So he was calling on the phone. He got a hold of dispatch.
A chase through the winding roads of Banff ensued.
He followed this cabbie, Berta Huey, on Banff Avenue, and followed the cab up Mountain Avenue. And at that time, obviously the driver of the vehicle, the individual that was probably responsible for the crime, pulled the vehicle over to the left shoulder, and then threw it into park, and then off he ran into the bush, heading in kind of a direction that was towards the Banff Springs Hotel. Of course, that's a very heavily bushed and treed area.
The driver lost track of the stranger, but a closer look at the cab revealed something very bad had occurred. There was blood on the door of the car, on the turn signal, and the steering wheel. At that same time, across town, police made a disturbing discovery.
One of the officers in Banff came across the body laying on Squirrel Street. Of course, the call comes in to us at Major Crimes, and very early on in the morning, a number of us strike out to Banff, Alberta.
The victim was Lucy Turmel. Her body was located just 1 block from the condo she shared with her boyfriend.
She had been murdered outside the cab and was laying in the middle of the street, right across from an elementary school on Squirrel Street. We were able to determine that she had been stabbed 17 times. So it was very vicious. She'd been stabbed once in her leg, once in her chest, and a number of times on the left side of her throat.
18 hours later, a third crime scene was located in a driveway between 2 residences, not far from where Lucy Turmel's cab was abandoned.
The owners of the residence on Nahami Drive, I believe it's called, came out and saw the weapon laying between the 2 driveways. It was about a 6-inch hunting knife, and it was covered in blood.
Investigators believed Lucy was killed for her taxi fares.
There was no money in the cab left. She had a wallet that she carried, and that had all of the tips and all of the money that she would have garnered from various fares. There was nothing there. Her trip sheet was there. There was an amount on the trip thing in the cab which notified $8.50.
The killer got away with very little cash.
You know, it's one of those things where you just kind of shake your head and say, for probably $130, she lost her life.
Welcome back to Crime Beat. The stabbing death of Lucy Turmel left residents and tourists on edge. The heavy presence of police investigators was little comfort, as the killer was still out there. Here again is Nancy Hixt with Murder in the Mountains.
Across the country, in the city of Lévis, Quebec, Lucy Turmel's family was shattered.
My mom called, and she was crying and yelling on the phone and telling me that Lucy died. And I was not sure to understand properly what she was trying to tell me. And it didn't go well. I was kind of in a shock.
Lucy was the youngest of 3 siblings.
I'm the older, Louis. My brother is Simon, and my sister was the little kid, Lucy. The 3 of us were quite bigger than my parents. The main reason is we were adopted, the 3 of us.
From a very young age, Lucy had an adventurous spirit.
She wanted to be a little bit free-minded person. She wanted to travel, she wanted to see the world. She didn't want to fit in a box as sometimes society wants us to be. She went to be a nanny in a Russian family in Toronto. She wanted to learn English, but she realized they spoke Russian. And she moved to a different family after that, and from there she got the bite of traveling and seeing outer world. So she went to different places, ended up in Banff.
Lucy got a job at the iconic Castle in the Rockies, the Banff Springs Hotel.
From the Banff Spring Hotel, she went after that working for restaurants where she met her boyfriend, Jeff. And she also worked for a taxi company. And she wanted to drive, one of her dream job was to drive the big bus that goes on the ice. And well, she had to go through different trainings. And so they wanted her to see, to train on the taxi, and well, that's the job she had. She loved this situation. She was in love for last year, and she liked it. She felt she was free, she could do a bunch of things.
In the spring of 1990, Lucy and her boyfriend moved in together. They were still in the process of unpacking boxes when she was murdered. A forensic examination of the cab revealed that none of the blood found inside of the vehicle was Lucy's. Police believed Lucy tried to fend off the attack and in the process injured the offender.
It was in her personality to fight back. She was raised with two boys, and we played rough games as kids, so she knew how to fight. She was not going to be a silent victim, so she had a fight with him, but she lost the game. But she did try to stay alive as much as she could, and we know the result.
There was only one man who caught a brief glimpse of the killer, the taxi driver who saw him run from Lucy's stolen cab into the woods.
We knew it was a male. Probably, you know, when Larry said it was under 25, we were looking at probably under 35 and down, you know, with a skinny build and dark hair. So
officers retraced Lucy's route.
All the neighborhood inquiries there was only houses on the one side of the street, on Squirrel Street. The elementary school was on the other. So we only had those limited amount of houses, but nobody heard any screaming or anything. So, and this is at probably 1:45 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So you would think if she was yelling and screaming and running for her life, that somebody would have heard, but no, nobody heard a thing. So
they went to the Banff Springs Hotel where she had picked up her final fares.
And interview all of the manager and all of the staff there. And do they recall anybody else there? So those names are all generated and a file made up on them. We then go down to Cougar Street and talk to all the residents there, trying to determine who the one male and the two females were, which may lead us to how this guy got into the cab or whatever the case might be. That wasn't very successful.
One man who worked at the Banff Springs Hotel and lived in staff accommodations said his roommate had a knife.
There was two other kids that stayed in that same room at the attic, Banff Annex. And they said, well, here's this knife. There's no knife, but here's the sheath. But this guy isn't even here because he had already left to catch a plane back because he's going to a family reunion. So he wasn't even in Banff. You just branch out and other names surface. And so they're interviewed, you know, and it's a very transient area. So very quickly, either that night or the next night, we had an individual from Quebec with a knife threatening people in one of the other nightclubs. Then, of course, I interviewed him the following morning, and lo and behold, he admits to the crime.
Days into the homicide investigation, there was a break in the case.
Lo and behold, he admits to the crime. Guy said, well, I think I killed her. And so I said, okay, well, what do you recall? And where is the knife that you had? So the knife was obviously dropped in the bar. As it turns out, it wasn't the knife at all. And as it turns out, he wasn't the guy responsible. So yeah, that was just drugs and alcohol delusions.
Officers pushed forward and once again came up with another viable suspect.
And there was another individual that was actually a Calgary resident. He had a kind of an extensive criminal record for violence and so on and so forth. So I met with him a number of times here in Calgary. He was not very cooperative with us. He admitted being out in Banff during the time of the homicide, but he refused to give us any blood sample.
Could DNA evidence prove his innocence or guilt?
Well, it was a whodunit. They knew at that point that the blood in the taxi cab did not belong to the victim. So the area in which the blood was found was on the steering wheel, on the seat, on the side panel of the door, I think on the rocker panel as well. Based on the conversations I had with them, I told them what type of samples would work best. A pulled hair sample, a mouth swab, a blood sample. So the police had to use their investigative techniques as best they could without alerting the suspect that they were trying to seize a DNA sample from him in order to be comparing the profile to the blood in the taxi cab.
Then we did an undercover operation on him to get a DNA sample from him.
Samples were sent to the RCMP Forensic Lab in Ottawa. Back in 1990, it took between 10 and 14 days for initial results of the DNA comparisons.
A lot of young guys out there cooperated with us because they weren't responsible. So they were helping us out. They gave us DNA samples. This individual refused to. So now you have to stop the wagon and say, okay, well, let's get this guy either eliminated or else he's our prime suspect.
It turned out that the suspect's lack of cooperation didn't equate to guilt. DNA cleared him.
And then subsequently I went back and saw this guy here in Calgary and said, "You're not the guy." He says, "Oh, thanks very much." I said, "You could have helped us big time if you would have done it right off the bat." But anyway, so.
The investigation extended beyond Banff, given the tens of thousands of people who visit daily from all over the world.
We also sent out letters to everybody that actually stayed in Banff during that period of time. So I think we took a couple of days prior to the homicide and then went to 3 or 4 days after the homicide. And we sent out letters to everybody that were from overseas and US that were in Banff during that period of time. Sent them letters. Did they see anything? Did they know anything about this? So that was kind of like the start of the canvas. So then the other thing is to generate more tips, is to put out these posters of what Lucy Turmel looked like, the knife that we found. And this went out to gondolas, to every place that would put this thing up, and all the businesses were very cooperative for us. Just to get that extra, somebody to tell us, come forward and say, listen, this guy had a knife very similar to that, and this is his name.
The knife was also examined. The blood on the weapon was Lucy's. No fingerprints were recovered.
And we had that analyzed right down to the nth degree. We sent it to a knife expert in the US to try to determine who would have manufactured this knife. Was there a distributor here in Canada for those knives? These are all things, investigative areas that you're going into.
Tips poured into the RCMP. Each one needed to be looked at, and each potential suspect cleared.
I think we're up to almost 200 people that we've taken DNA samples from. Probably the lab is getting a little upset here. Here's another sample.
The testing took place over several months. As the police were sending me samples from different suspects, I would batch those samples, and once I got a result out, I would immediately inform the police that these samples did not match the blood in the taxi cab. That would then lead to the police looking at other avenues of investigation, and they would look at other samples and send me another batch of samples.
Time passed, and seasons changed. The case went cold as Lucy Turmel's killer continued to elude police.
It was a little bit more tough on my mother. She was scared of that person. If that person would come and try to kill her, she had that in mind. And I said, no, it just, for some reason, it just happened, and he's not going to run after you. But she got a few times calls that there were nobody at the end, and certainly not him, but she associated with him. So it was a long years.
Then, more than a year and a half later, one man's curiosity provided a new lead.
Yeah, I was 20 years old, living here in Ontario, just finished high school. Shortly after that, I had a girlfriend move out to Banff, Alberta. I went out there to stay with her. My girlfriend was working at the top of the Sulphur Mountain gondola, And first or second day out there, after I got settled, I went out there to see her for lunch.
Dwayne Jung rode the gondola up the mountain, witnessing spectacular scenery and a breathtaking view of Banff. But his attention was stolen by a poster about a homicide.
What I noticed about the poster is I've always been intrigued by true crime. That's the type of book I would read. That's the type of show I will watch. The picture of Lucy Turmel herself and the murder weapon, and it drew me to it. And I just read the short description on the poster itself.
He met his girlfriend at the top of the gondola.
I met her at her lunch break. We went over to the little cafe area and sat and had her lunch and a quick bite to eat. And it just came up that about the help wanted poster, the details on it, how it hadn't been solved. There was I believe the crime took place in 1990 and the police were basically at a standstill and had no further leads on it. She made reference that she knew somebody who had some information about the incident itself. I asked her, well, how does she know about it? And she told me that her roommate's family was family friends of the gentleman. I was very intrigued. I was asking questions. I was asking, how did she know? Why did she not go to the police? Why did she not confront the family about it yet?
That night, Dwayne asked his girlfriend's roommate what she knew about the murder in the mountains.
She was very open and upfront about it. She did tell me that, yeah, I know who it was. And I asked her, obviously, how do you know? And if you look at the wanted poster at the time, it had a very distinct knife. That was the murder weapon used to kill Mr. Turmel. And she said, well, I know where that knife came from. It was very distinct. It was a present to the murderer from his parents on a recent trip that the families took to Mexico. And the knife was a very Mexican, very detailed, very artistic type of knife. I'm very drawn at this point. And I asked her, I said, are you sure? And of course she said, yeah. She said, that is definitely the knife that was given to Ryan. And I said, well, how come nobody said anything? The police are at a standstill, and this poor young lady lost her life. And her answer to me that, and it didn't sit very well, was that, well, it's family, and I can't bring it up because it's family. And she was very comfortable that I did bring forward to the police. I think she was very happy that somebody did. She couldn't do it herself. But I think she did feel, there was no hesitation when I did tell her I was going to go to the police and talk to them about it. I got his full name, obviously Ryan Love, and she had no hesitation, as I said, with giving his name.
Dwayne Jung contacted the Banff RCMP.
Obviously they asked how I came up with that name, where I got it from, the background story, and I shared with him exactly what I've just told you, that traveling here from Ontario, saw the poster, asked my girlfriend knew the friend, and the friend provided the name of Ryan Love. He did ask how certain I was, how certain she was. She was very certain that that was the knife that belonged to Ryan.
In 1991, more than a year and a half after the murder of Lucy Turmel, investigators finally had a possible break in the case. A fresh tip and a name. When officers reviewed their files, they realized Ryan Love had come up before, during the initial door-to-door canvass.
That was one of the persons that worked at the Banff Springs Hotel and stayed at the Annex. We were able to determine that that person that owned that sheath, that was the leather container that you would carry the knife in, had left Banff and was going to a family reunion in Thunder Bay, Ontario.
Ryan Love's friends told police they believed he left Banff before Lucy Turmel was killed. But Love was never interviewed or officially cleared as a suspect.
You know, he was an 18-year-old young guy that basically, when we saw photographs of him, really fit into kind of the physical profile as well. And so now we know that that's his knife sheath. There's no knife. We have the knife, but now we have this person saying, well, Ryan Jason Love always had this knife and he carried it with him. So now the bells and whistles are going off all over the place.
BC RCMP officers interviewed Ryan Love at his parents' home on Vancouver Island.
Okay, the date is the 31st of December, 1991. The time now is 3:43 p.m. This is Constable Dave Bate, and present with me is Constable Brad Sawchuk and Ryan Jason Love, spelled L-O-V-E. Well, Ryan, we'd like to talk to you concerning a knife which we think you owned at one point at least, and which may have been used in the murder of Lucy Turmel, who was murdered on the 17th of May, 1990.
Bringing pictures of the knife, and then he identifies the knife as, hey, that's my knife, and identifies it from a mark that he used to jump a person's car with his knife, and it sparked on, so it left an indication on the knife. So he said, oh yeah, that's my knife. Where did you find it?
I haven't seen it since Banff.
Okay, so when was the last time you did see the knife?
Oh God, who knows, our room was a mess. So. I remember the sheath being there though.
Were you in Banff when the murder happened?
I think so. I'm not sure because I left for...
Like you would have no doubt heard, there must have been lots on the news about it and things like that. Everybody would have been talking about it.
Yeah, but I left for Ontario too.
Do you recall if you were actually in town when it happened?
I don't know. Could have been, I mean, it's hard to say. Then you say the 17th to me and I go, when was the 17th?
Basically what we're about right now is to ask you how your knife could have got into the body of the victim.
It's a pretty graphic question there.
Pretty morbid thought, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean,
it may,
I can see where you're going with something. Is
that's what we're here to find out.
Yeah, you're getting into real touchy and...
I'm asking you if you have some explanation or ideas on how that could have happened.
I mean, obviously it left my place and somebody took it. I imagine this is a big excitement with a big break in the case kind of thing. But I mean, there's any fool can see that you're pointing at three possibilities. Is one, somebody took it, one, I went and took it, and the third one, what's the third one? Okay, two possibilities then. Somebody took it and then I took it, yeah, or I'm involved in this somehow.
The interview continued for nearly an hour. At the end, investigators asked Love if he would provide a blood sample.
I don't know if you've heard about DNA testing or not, but it allows the lab to basically say, yes, that was him, or yes, or no, it wasn't.
Okay, well, no, I think I'll talk about Laura before we go. Blood samples and stuff,
Okay, well, we'll conclude the statement for now. The time now is 4:26 p.m.
Over the next few months, police visited Love's hometown of Duncan, BC on a number of occasions to try to get a voluntary sample of his DNA.
I went and interviewed him with his father was there.
Again, Love refused.
We're not going to let this thing die. And that's what I said to Ryan. I said, until we eliminate you, Ryan, you're number one on our hit list. So.
By then, all suspects except Ryan Love had been cleared. Police decided to try something more covert. Ryan Love became the target of an undercover operation on Vancouver Island.
They ended up meeting up with him, then and some of his buddies, and then they went out to later on to this place called the Stone Church. They were discussing cowlicks, and unbeknownst to me, but to get rid of a cowlick, you just pull it out. And so one of the operators reached across and said, well, that's how you get rid of it. And he pulled out, got 4 or 5 hair strands, and of course that's with the roots, so that's exceptionally good evidence. But you see, Ryan, because we always ask for a blood sample from him, so he was under the auspices that if I never give them a blood sample, they'll never figure out that I'm the bad guy. And little did he know.
The sample was sent to the RCMP Forensic Lab in Ottawa. Would Ryan Love be eliminated, or was he Lucy Turmel's killer?
I had a record of the profile from the DNA, from the blood sample from the taxi cab, And then I proceeded to compare it to the DNA profile that they had obtained from this suspect, the hair sample that they obtained from the suspect. And right away, I looked at it and I said, we've got a hit. We've got a match.
Forensic scientists found not only was Love a match, they uncovered another rare genetic characteristic.
Typically, when you're looking at a DNA profile, you're looking at two bands of DNA, two fragments of DNA. You inherit half your DNA from your mom and half from your dad. So typically, you're looking at these two areas of interest for DNA, for each profile, for each person. In one specific test, the individual had 3 profiles. I had a 3-banded pattern for one test that matched the suspect, and his known sample had the same 3-banded pattern. So just looking at the odds of that happening, it was astronomical.
More than 2 years after Lucy Turmel's murder, DNA identified her killer. But Ryan Love wasn't arrested. The hair sample, taken by undercover officers, was flagged as a potential problem.
It was the way that it was taken. It wasn't that it was taken by undercover officers. It was that he didn't really consent to having his hair pulled from his head. It was done as part of a joke, but he hadn't consented to that.
Undercover officers headed back to BC, this time to the Sunshine Coast.
Now the new scenario is we bring him across to Horseshoe Bay, and then the operator takes him up to Gibson's, and we do a number of scenarios up there.
Ryan Love partied with his new friends at Cedars Inn.
The plan was to rob a fishing boat, and so they were getting ready for that, and as part of that they were staying in a motel room, and an RCMP officer was the chambermaid for the hotel room, and he made sure that there were clean bedding, clean bags in the garbage and that sort of stuff.
They were partying a bit, and yeah, so they're sitting around. So fortunately enough, Ryan blew his nose and threw the tissue not in the toilet, but in the garbage can. Now we have 2 samples now.
Well, then I get a new sample in the form of a tissue paper with nasal mucus on it, as it was reported to me. I proceeded to extract DNA out of that and take it through all of the various steps of our protocol, and then I tested it for the DNA profile, and sure enough, at the first test, the DNA profile matched that of the blood in the taxi cab, as well as it matched the DNA profile from the hair sample they had received previously from the suspect. So everything matched.
Welcome back. Years after Lucy Turmel was violently stabbed to death in the popular tourist town of Banff, police finally had DNA evidence that identified the killer. But in the early 1990s, DNA was a relatively new science. Would it be enough to convict Ryan Love of murder? Here now is Nancy Hixt with the conclusion of Murder in the Mountains.
When Lucy Turmel was killed in the spring of 1990, it was the first homicide Banff had seen in 20 years. Ryan Love was arrested and flown back to Alberta to face justice. It was the first glimpse of the accused killer.
Interpol, Calgary Police Service, most every major police department across the country has in one way or another offered us assistance.
Now officially charged with second-degree murder, Ryan Love was again interviewed by police. But even after being shown the evidence against him, Love didn't offer a confession.
You know, he's an interesting kid, because he's about I think just late 19, maybe early 20s. And so he thought that everything was a big joke. And that's the kind of the impression I got sitting in the interview room when I told him that, we had these samples and so on and so forth. and that the people that he's been hanging around with were undercover police officers. I think he just thought that this is a big joke, that I haven't given you a blood sample, so you're not going to be able to do anything.
In 1994, 4 years after Lucy Turmel was killed, her parents traveled to Alberta to attend the trial.
I feel I just want to cry.
It was a lengthy trial in front of Court of Queen's Bench Justice. What we could put before the court was that Ryan Love worked at the Banff Springs Hotel, and he lived in staff accommodation at the Banff Springs Hotel, and he lived there at the time of Lucy's murder. We could establish that the next day he left Banff, went to Calgary, caught a flight to Thunder Bay, Ontario for a pre-existing family reunion. And we could establish that he had some injuries to his hand afterwards, and a doctor confirmed that he'd suffered an injury to his hand. One of the injuries was perhaps not related to the murder. The others, we don't know. We never got close enough to look at that. By the time the RCMP looked at his injuries, they were just scars.
The prosecution alleged Lucy Turmel was killed for $130 in fares and a $20 float she carried that night. The blood found inside the stolen cab was key evidence.
Probably the biggest reason that we were able to solve this case is because of Lucy Turmel herself, because it was apparent that she had fought her assailant, because her assailant had obviously suffered wounds significant enough to leave a fair amount of blood in the cab that he had stolen. And so the last thing she did before she died was to help gather the evidence that would be necessary down the road. It ended up giving the evidence that we needed, because if he hadn't been injured during the killing of Lucy Turmel, we would have had no DNA evidence. There would have been no case. There would never have been a suspect developed.
The prosecution's case centered exclusively on DNA.
And it was the justice's first DNA trial as well, so we spent a lot of time educating the court on DNA typing, DNA profiling, the whole process involved in that, because we had to make sure the judge understood the evidence in order to make an intelligent decision about the evidence.
In my testimony, based on the information I've discussed with you earlier about the three-banded profile and all the other matching DNA profiles in the different tests we used, I could only conclude that to a very high degree of scientific certainty, the blood from the taxi cab came from the suspect.
What was significant was that DNA was the only evidence. So it wasn't just DNA was helpful, DNA was the entire case. So it was a case that pushed DNA to the forefront and really tested the science of DNA forensic typing and the population genetics aspect that are part of developing the statistical likelihood numbers. I think the way we probably argued it to the judge was that effectively, because of those statistics, it likely meant that there was no one on Earth that had ever lived on Earth that would have had that pattern.
Ryan Love was convicted of the second-degree murder of Lucy Turmel.
The judge was satisfied that the knife that had been recovered was the murder weapon because Lucy's blood was found on it. He was satisfied that robbery was the motive, and ultimately, once he was satisfied that it was Ryan Love's DNA found in the cab, then he was satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that there was no other conceivable explanation other than Ryan Love was the killer.
Love was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 20 years. But Love didn't accept his conviction.
The biggest issue in this case, aside from identification of the profile as being the defendant's profile, was the constitutionality of the undercover operation. And so the trial judge ruled that the evidence was admissible. There was a charter application to exclude it. He ruled that it was admissible. After the conviction, the case was appealed to the Alberta Court of Appeal, and the Alberta Court of Appeal decided in a 3-0 decision that the trial judge had erred with respect to the Stone Church hair sample.
At the Stone Church, officers plucked several hairs from Love's head to get a DNA sample, under the guise of fixing a cowlick. But officers later went to Cedars Inn, where they obtained a cast-off sample from Love after he threw away a used tissue.
The Court of Appeal ruled that because of the way in which that hair sample was obtained, that was constitutionally impermissible, and so they excluded that evidence, but they were fine with the tissue sample, and we only needed one of them. So the tissue sample was more than enough to justify the conviction.
Ryan Love's conviction was upheld. Dwayne Jung followed the case and takes some comfort in knowing he helped bring a killer to justice.
In the end, a young lady lost her life, and I had information through my girlfriend's friend from wherever, but I had information that could help, and it did help. And the reward or not, there's no way I could sit with that and not do anything about it. It wasn't about the money at all. I did my good deed. I helped take a murderer off the street.
But Jung's tip was rewarded.
I believe it was $10,000. $5,000 was put up by Banff Taxis, the company that Ms. Turmel worked for. The other half was put up by the town of Banff itself. And it was Constable Patterson that when he told me they got a conviction, he did stay in contact. He informed me that the reward would be paid out. By that time, I was back here in Ontario. We had moved back, and I did get checks in the mail.
While serving his prison sentence, Ryan Love admitted he robbed and killed Lucy Turmel. He was first released on parole in 2011, 19 years after his arrest for murder. Since then, Love's release has been suspended and revoked.
The sad thing is he had a chance to, by the prison systems, to be a better person, and he ended up to be a stupid jackass. So it was already in his blood, I think, to take bad decisions, and his history by time showed that.
According to the Parole Board of Canada, Love presents a low to moderate risk for violent reoffending and has successfully completed recommended programming with good reports of progress. In the spring of 2024, he was again granted day parole. Lucy's murder had a devastating impact on her family.
My father died 2 years ago, and my mother is 94 right now. It was hard for my mom. Pop was, it was hard for him, but I think he managed it a little bit with less impact on him. But it was hard on my mom, and she had issues going to bed. She was scared about different things. She got over it by times, and she moved on, but it had more impact on her.
Lucy Turmel's brother honors her by living his life just as she did, filled with adventure.
You never know. You know, you can talk about yesterday, you can dream of tomorrow. The only thing you have is today. So you can plan, you can have an agenda, you can have dreams about different things, but the only thing you really have is today. So live it.
We now want to take a moment to remember Constable Nigel Patterson. He was a veteran member of the RCMP, served in Banff twice during his 25-year career, and was the file coordinator on Lucy's case. He was heavily invested in this investigation and tragically passed away during the making of this episode. We offer our condolences to his family and is remembered for his dedicated service to the RCMP and the community. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast, now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.